Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Risk Matrix.
The Risk Matrix, baby, roll tide. We're in the house for another episode.
We are in the house for another episode. We're ready to go. Before we talk about our topic today, which is cold weather safety and some of the things that have come out recently that should help employers protect their workers and for workers to help protect themselves, we're going to shoot on over to James, and he's going to tell us who we're powered by today.
Today's episode, The Risk Matrix, powered by Veriforce, is sponsored by Tawny Insurance and Safety Solutions. Now, Tawny is a full-service insurance agency and safety consulting firm. Tawny is uniquely positioned in the market with an understanding of hiring client, insurance requirements and regulatory obligations. Veriforce clients and customers can receive discounts of up to 30% on commercial and employee benefit insurance programs. So head on over to TawnyInsures.com/Veriforce for details. But I think it's very ironic that we're talking about cold weather safety, and it's cooled off in Louisiana. It's only like 92.
Oh man, listen, it's cooled off in Maine, and it's in the 60s, and it drops in the 50s at night. I think we're gonna get some frost soon. So
I hear you. Well, the whole United States this year, and no matter where you are, everywhere I go, and I travel a lot, everyone's talking about the heat and how hot it is. And OSHA has an NEP for heat stress, and we should be thinking about protecting our workers from heat. But at the same time, cold does not get the same visibility or the same emphasis within safety management systems and programs and safe work practices as probably it should.
I kind of agree with that. I will say this, working in the Northeast, and I have traveled a lot too. I've been to Nebraska. I went to school in Minnesota. I'm from Wisconsin, and I think you're going hunting in Wyoming soon. It gets cold, okay, in a lot of these places. And by cold, I mean like below zero wind chill and, things that cause horrible problems for people when they have to work in the cold for long periods of time. So, I think we should talk about the cold just because it should deserve equal time.
Well, I don't think you should wait till it gets cold to start preparing for this hazard that your workers are going to encounter. Even in the South, okay? Yeah. We typically have long periods of cold, but we do have cold. And typically it comes with wind and wet. So cold, wind, wet equals potential hypothermia. So just like any other hazard, we can start off with this. I always recommend that you have what is a written program. What is our company going to do to protect our workers that are exposed to cold weather hazards, right? And begin there and create your program. Mm-hmm. So, what we all understand, perhaps maybe some more than others, what's some things that workers need to worry about when being potentially exposed to cold weather?
So I'm going to go back to the basics. This is just me, right? And I think when we talk about just about everything on this podcast, it comes right down to the basics of hazard identification. And part of hazard identification for heat, cold, temperature, weather, etc. You have to identify the hazards and what the effects are going to be before you get in the field, before you're faced with them, okay? And most of that in a cold weather climate has to do with, and with heat too, it's the same thing. It has to do with what are you going to be exposed to? What are the tasks that you're going to do? Do they require dexterity? Are you going to be out for 5 minutes or 15 minutes, or could you be out for 8 hours or 10 hours? I know that you have clients in North Dakota, okay? And they work outside all day. And if they're fixing something, it could be more than 8 hours. It could take a long day or double shifts. So are we pre-planning the work? This goes back to the pre-planning the work such that we can identify the tools, PPE, et cetera, that we need in order to protect hands, fingers, toes, circulatory systems, et cetera, and especially protect people who have pre-existing conditions that cold weather might exacerbate.
You know,
So,
what I see some of, particularly during the winter months, excuse me, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. A lot of times you get folks like me from the South that are up there working in various construction or oil and gas type activities, outages, turnarounds, things of that nature, or project based or whatever. They find themselves leaving 70 degrees in Louisiana, for example, in January, and they're in these other states the next day where it's the high today is going to be 19 and the
right.
low tonight is going to be minus 27 with a 30-mile-an-hour wind coming out of the north. We're probably not giving people enough information on how to prepare for that, their bodies to prepare for that, what kind of clothes to wear, and we're certainly not giving people enough time to acclimate to the cold.
Mhm.
What say you?
So, first of all, when I've gone to cold weather, or I grew up in a cold weather state, okay, so I know what to bring. But if I'm like you and I'm from Alabama, Louisiana area, Mississippi, Florida, I can assure you that a lot of the places that you're going to fly to that are cold to work are not going to have parkas and layers and all these kinds of things in the airport for you to buy and walk out the door with. So preparation is key. And this is just an opinion. I think it's incumbent upon companies that bring people from other locales into their cold weather locations. It's incumbent upon the company to plan for this and to provide, or at least to provide time for acclimation so that workers can get the tools that they need, the equipment that they need, the clothing that they need in order to go into the field. Which brings us to a really touchy subject, right? What is PPE in a cold weather climate? Should employers be supplying more than hats and gloves, right? Should they be supplying cold weather parkas? Should they be supplying things that have special insulation in them? I mean, I thought about this today. I was thinking about you going up to Wyoming, and you're going to have to prepare yourself. But what happens when you bring that worker into the cold, um, either for maintenance or a one-time thing? Who's responsible?
That is a very good question, and ultimately the company I think is responsible for the safety and health of their workers, and part of that is preparing the worker to meet this particular environment. That goes back to the plan that we're talking about earlier, having a written program that defines what is it we're going to do and not do this on the fly. Sometimes when we're talking about this extreme cold, and most of my workers have to work outside. Not too many of my guys are office workers, right? So they're going to be out there in the cold. And we understand, hey, frostbite is an issue in some of these work environments. Hypothermia, you don't think of workers dying of hypothermia, but even in a safety company, I like to lost two guys one time in North Dakota. We didn't have a really good lone worker policy for us. We had it for the hands, but we didn't really think about it for us. And so I had two safety professionals that went out on a job site, and non-safety professionals are going to love this. They got out there. They were by themselves. They jumped out of the truck because it was like minus 22. They left the truck running, which is okay. They locked the door of the truck when they got out to do an inspection, left the truck running, the radio's in it, their cell phones in it, no way to get back in the truck. Now, I had one of those workers, one of my safety professionals' wives, not called me to say, hey, I haven't heard from this guy. Have you heard from him? And I looked at my watch and, it's getting dark. So I try to call him. I can't get him on the phone. I call the guy he's with. We can't get him on the phone. Fortunately, we were able to contact the crews, the company they were embedded with, and they sent someone out to check on them. And they found these guys huddled up together, cold, but still alive, right? So
it could have been worse. They could have been popsicles.
But they could have been graveyard dead. And it scared me to death. And I'm like, we got to have a process in place. This is something I need to take ownership of. I didn't even consider that. What if we lose communication? What if somebody gets hurt? Sometimes you're working with companies that have one safety professional out on the road riding around. If we don't have a way to check in on this lone worker, in this case, the safety folks, if they had spent the night out there, they might have died. So definitely would have been hyperthermic by the time we got to them in the morning at those type of temperatures. So when I think of working in cold, one of the things I like to emphasize is, do you have a lone worker policy that considers these type of things compared with some of your other written programs out there, and coupled with cold work considerations?
100%. 100%. You know what? There is a crossover there between some of these new technologies and cold weather safety, lone worker safety, etc. A lot of the wearable technology now, a lot of the GPS technology can pinpoint workers. They can give you vital signs, biometrics. I know that gets into HIPAA and some of the privacy rules. And I know workers are loath to have a lot of their private information or health information out there, even if it's just blood pressure or temperature or some of those things. But more often than not, these new technologies of tracking workers and watching vital signs and being able to connect to a satellite to check on them are essential, especially in extreme conditions. And that's heat and
I
cold.
agree with that. And look, heat stress has been at the forefront of the discussion for many years now. But we really don't hardly ever talk about the effect of cold on the body. We talk about the effect of heat on the body, but we don't talk about the effects of cold on the body. So, increased risk of cardiac issues like heart attack and stroke, they can be exasperated when you start working in extreme cold and your body loses, body heat. So
Diabetes,
diabetes,
circulatory system, that
absolutely.
all kind of plays into this, right? And blood clots can form, from veins and stuff that are freezing at the surface of your skin, and they start to warm up, and you have problems. And so, there's a lot to consider when you start thinking about, like, how can somebody get injured, which I don't think people think about when it comes to heat or cold stress, right? They'll say, oh, heat stress, heat stroke, all the common things, hypothermia, etc. But there are so many conditions that are brought on by extreme temperatures when the body's exposed to these.
And on a personal level, when it's cold, what happens to your immune system?
Goes down.
Get suppressed, right? And that's why you see colds and flu and respiratory diseases. And we just came out of COVID. We've seen what that does, kind of things during that time of year. It seems to get more severe during that time of year. And it's not because the weather's cold, it's because your immune system is being suppressed. So that's something to talk about in some of the planning of the work that you do, and in some of the education, I think, of our employees, which we'll get to in just a second. But here's one more related to cold from a physical standpoint. Tasks that normally we're not all suited up in, cold weather gear, foul weather gear, that kind of stuff, sometimes are planned in the nature of working in less extreme events, or less extreme weather. So I've got my work process where I might be wearing normal leather gloves, and then now it's the winter time. Are we considering dexterity issues in the planning of the work because now I've got to wear all this other gear?
Right. And there are also advances in technology that help with articulation in gloves or dexterity, and some exoskeleton type applications that can be that are put into clothing in order to help with some of the tasks that when your body gets put under extreme heat or extreme cold, they are assistive in nature, so that you can use bigger gloves or you can wear bulky clothing, but you still can perform the work. So, I agree with you. There are a lot of considerations that I don't think people are taking into account.
I agree with you on that. Cold weather defense, if you will, has to move beyond just saying wear a jacket.
Hmm.
And I think it begins with acknowledging that working in this extreme cold can be a threat to workers' health and safety. OSHA obviously acknowledges that. So companies should have a training and education program built around cold weather awareness. What say you about that?
I think they have to have a training and policy around it, but I think they also need to have a plan for educating people on layering systems, on the types of things they should be wearing, what they should be made of, what they not should not be made of. I mean, I think back to my early days as a geologist in the field and being, in a snowstorm sitting on a drill rig, and I was in my car in the heat and out of my car and in my car and out of my car. And the worst of it all was that's the wrong thing to do, right? You should be educating employees on layering, on wicking technology, on the dangers of going in and out of hot to cold to extreme, because that can be just as dangerous as standing outside the whole time you're working.
Absolutely. I also think companies that work in some of these extreme cold weather climates, which can include Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Wyoming, and all those South Dakota, North Dakota, those type of states, have some type of cold weather preparedness kit in the vehicles for your workers. You get out there, the weather goes south quickly, you have an accident, you get stranded, the vehicle quits on you. You need to be able to have some sort of kit, some sort of preparedness kit inside the vehicle that can sustain you till help can get there.
So I'm wondering, James, do you have that in your vehicle? Because I have that in mine, and
I
that's
do
only
not have that in my vehicle. I do have a warm weather down in Louisiana kit consisting of some bottled water.
Okay, all right. So up here in the north, that's a very common thing. Not always related to work, very commonly related to family safety. We have a kit in my car that includes, those thermal blankets, the kind of they're wrapped up and they're silver, thermal blankets, food, water, all kinds of things, flares, etc. Because the last thing you want to do is be on your own and not be able to, like your workers, not be able to contact somebody or survive long enough to weather through it.
And I also think companies need to have inside their written procedure at what point are we going to call it off? At what point from the temperature with the wind chill? I tell people down here, I don't care what it says on the thermometer. Feels like is what it is. Okay. If it feels like it's -70, you're not going to see James Junkin outside. Right. I'm not even getting out of bed for that. But, many times in North Dakota and in those South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, they're working in sub-zero temperatures pretty regularly with the wind chill.
Every day,
Every day.
every day. It brings to mind Wisconsin, where I grew up, and going out to stand for the bus in the morning, and it could be 40 below wind chill, and we were going to stand outside at the end of the driveway for that bus. My mother packed us up, and we had our eyes showing, and our eyeballs were cold, right? But we were dressed in layers and boots and bread bags in our boots, to keep the snow out because we couldn't afford boots, but we were out there, right? And the buses plugged in order to get to us, and it was cold. So, being outside, and we'd go out for recess in that kind of weather. So, um, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? I think we were hardy folks back then. I'm not as hardy now. I like the heat cranked and I like to stay inside. But we could open a whole nother can of worms with weather related work, and keeping an eye on the weather, keeping an eye on the temperature, keeping an eye on all those things, and having contingencies on when does the stop work come, right? As a director, safety director for a crane company, we certainly had that, right? We had hurricane policy, we had wind policies, we had stop work for rain, we had stop work for lightning, we had stop work for, if you name it, and it happened on the East Coast, we had a policy for it. And it was a strict policy of stop work because nobody wants to see a crane go down or somebody get hurt because we didn't heed weather warnings.
We typically have those same things. Not so much the cold. We do have cold weather policy. It's rare. I pull it out down here in the South. But a lot of my clients use those cold weather policies, severe weather policies. We certainly have hurricane policies. But I want to make this point related to what those policies are and the work that you have with your hiring clients. That should be discussed during the bidding process and having a bridging document between the hiring client and you as to what the expectations are. So we're not all surprised if we have, why is company ABC taking off today when everybody else is working? So let's get it together. Let's get it in the planning stage of the work. Make sure we're all on the same page of whose policy we're going to follow. Because remember, I like to tell contractors all the time, you are responsible for your employees. Your employees are following your policy. Yes, you work for a hiring client / operator / owner. Have that discussion as to whose policy we're following and what those limits are early on before the event.
Right. So I'm going to jump back, and I'm also going to say the bridging document is a good idea, but a lot of times I've addressed those concerns in the contract, right?
Right.
That's the first place where maybe even before the contract when you start talking about the work, but definitely in the contract there should be some contingency about what the expectations are, right? How they meet those expectations, of course, for a contractor is their business, as long as it's as stringent or more stringent than the controlling contractor, the person who's contracting you to do the work, right? So, I address that sometimes in a contract, sometimes I address it in a bridging document, sometimes that's a discussion that we have, it's a mutual policy, but somebody needs to have this conversation and have it written down that this is what's going to happen in case of 40-degree below zero wind chill,
So
etc.
as we kind of wrap this up, just in summary, have a plan for cold weather exposure, cold environment exposure, have a policy, understand what your company's responsibilities are, what we're going to do in protecting the workers, because cold weather is as much a hazard as heat stress for all of our workers that particularly have to contend with the environment on a daily basis. Make sure you got a proper training and education program. You're understanding at what temperatures stop work is going to be initiated, and that's communicated between you and your hiring client, or if you're a hiring client, between you and your contractors. Have emergency plans. Don't forget about your lone worker policies. And most of all, listen to your workers. If the PPE you're supplying is causing more problems than it's protecting, we need to look at some of the PPE that we have in the field right now. Dr. Martin certainly mentioned a lot of things about the different technologies that can be utilized to keep workers warm, including planned break schedules, et cetera, at certain temperatures. So just even though it's still warm outside, at least it is for me, even though it's October, and we still down in Louisiana go trick-or-treating in shorts and flip-flops during that time. The rest of the country's turning cold, and we want to make sure we're bringing awareness to this to everyone that's viewing this video cast.
Boy, James, I wish on Halloween up here in the Northeast that we could trick or treat every year and have it be warm. Every once in a while, we get a warm night. It's great. But usually, my kids and all the kids in the neighborhood are dressed up over their costumes with warm winter coats. So, on that note, I'd like to say thank you again for listening to the Risk Matrix, another episode of the Risk Matrix with James Junkin and
Roll
myself.
Tide and keep bringing those workers home safe from high hazard jobs.